Hope everybody is doing well on this Tuesday evening. That's right, it is Tuesday evening on December 19th. So we're actually less than a week away from Christmas. And as I put in the whole intro and all along those lines, there are some folks that are trying to figure out which of the leaders are being naughty and nice, if you want to believe in the whole kind of Christmas mythology and all along those lines. And one of the things that I said I was going to bring up, and I'll bring it up right now, and then I'll bring in my esteemed guests and esteemed panelists that are with us on a regular basis, was an article that actually came out of The Guardian. And it was talking about democracy's Super Bowl, because apparently in the year 2024, there are going to be 40 elections that will shape global politics. That is what folks are saying. From Russia to South Africa, India to the United States, the coming year is definitely one that could either embolden dictators or revitalize democracy. So apparently, there have been some folks that are wondering how democracy was doing and whether democracy was on a decline or on an uptick. But apparently, a record-breaking 40 plus countries representing more than 40% of the world's population and an outsized chunk of the global GDP are due to hold national elections in 2024. And the outcomes taken separately and together might determine who controls and directs the 21st century world. So definitely there'll be a lot of these elections taking place, like I said, in places ranging as far as some of the most powerful and wealthiest states, like the United States, India, and the UK, to some of the weakest, like South Sudan, and of course, even some of those that are ruled by dictators, such as Russia and Iran, and some that are very stressed because of what's going on in their own world, such as Taiwan and Ukraine. They're saying that some of these elections will be fair and open, free and fair, and some may be a whole lot less so because they might only have one candidate, or they may even have a candidate that is pretty much going to win no matter what takes place, because we do know that there are authoritarian forces out there as well. So I'm not thinking that there's much chance, I could be wrong, and Adam could correct me, that China's Xi Jinping or Russia's Vladimir Putin stand a chance of being deposed or unelected, even though, hey, stranger things have happened in the world. But I'm thinking that that won't be happening in this particular case. There are also some folks that are talking about some of the populist parties, including some that might be far right, such as the Fidesz party in Hungary. And of course, there are military coup plotters and Islamic militants that are in places ranging from Venezuela to Chad. So one of the articles that I was reading was saying, and that's where I'm going to bring in my esteemed folks, is that global freedom declined for the 17th consecutive year, according to Freedom House, the independent U.S.-based watchdog, which they concluded that in its 2023 report. Moscow's war of aggression led to devastating human rights atrocities in Ukraine, new coups and other attempts to undermine representative governments, destabilize Burkina Faso, Tunisia, Peru, and Brazil. They also pointed out that ongoing repression could continue to diminish basic liberties in places like Guyana, or Guinea, I should say, and constrain those in Turkey, Myanmar, and Thailand, among others. So the report said that while 35 countries experienced declines in political rights and civil liberties, 34 saw overall gains. So autocrats were neither infallible nor unbeatable. So, hey, maybe there is hope in this whole notion of seeing either Putin or the leader from China getting deposed or unelected, and all in that space. So the last thing that this particular article said was the effects of corruption and a focus on political control at the expense of competence. And I know that that's something that Adam is real big on. Expose the limits of the authoritarian model offered by Beijing, Moscow, Caracas, or Tehran. So the first person I'm gonna bring up is none other than Adam, because I know he oftentimes talks about benevolent leaders and all along those lines. So as I was trying to figure out how I could start off this particular show, that seemed like a good way to start it off. Is there seems to be a push among folks that want democracy and all along those lines, and even some people are saying that even in open democracies, there's a whole question is what you can say and how much you can say and all of that, because we've seen even some of those threats from folks that have wanted to make speech that might be deemed hateful to the Jewish population, the Muslim population, and other populations as well. But I've heard you say several times before I bring in Sasha, Kim, and see who else we've got about this notion of a benevolent dictator and everything. So, what is your thoughts? Is democracy at a seeing a decline? Because apparently this organization was saying that it has had a decline for the 17th consecutive year, even though we've got all these countries that'll be holding elections, 40 that can shape the global politics of 2024. So, Adam, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think first, democracy is absolutely on the decline and for good reason. But before I get to that, I would not characterize Mr. Putin's actions as a war of aggression, but rather as a peacekeeping operation to make sure that Russia's borders are secure from the NATO expansion that has continued throughout the years. But regardless of that, democracy is on the decline because, number one, with a democracy, you allow millions and millions of idiots to vote, otherwise known as low information voters. And that allows the election of bad leaders and the promulgation of bad policies. Number two, in democracy, money corrupts the process. As we've seen in the United States, the rich people are the ones who gain access to the politicians and to the political process. And number three, democracy is too slow. It does not allow leaders to adapt to changing circumstances expeditiously and in a manner that helps the people. A benevolent dictatorship is a better form of government. And if you need any proof of that, look at Singapore. Singapore has a robust middle class, free healthcare, free education, free housing, and they are some of the happiest people on the face of the earth. Democracy's demise has been long coming, and I welcome it because democracy ultimately is ruled by idiots and is ultimately going to destroy itself.
Well, I'm gonna bring in somebody that might have a form of disagreement with you, because I don't think that he necessarily thinks that Ukraine is not being the victim of a war of aggression and all along those lines. But I'll let the man speak for himself. I'm gonna bring in Sasha Starr and see what he's got to say about your notion of this idea that it's all about NATO and it's not them defending.
Well, Sasha, Mark, has lived in Moscow, so I suspect he'll agree with me that the way to go is through autocracy, not democracy.
Well, I'm facing two different questions. One about democracy, and another one about Russian-Ukrainian war. About democracy, Adam, I agree with you. And the best model of democracy of ever been, it was ancient Greece. And if we could establish ancient Greece model today, some people would oppose it because of the element of slavery, but slavery is not that bad like people would think about it. It's a very healthy stage of development of human race, and at times it was necessary and unavoidable. Some other times there were some other forms available. Now, speaking about Ukraine-Russia affair, look, a lot of people tie up Ukraine-Russia affair and Israeli-Hamas or Gaza or whatever it might be affair, but there are two fundamental differences. Now, I want to see both of them under the lens of, let's put it this way, the real politics championed by Professor John Mearsheimer. Now, his policy of real politics is very simple, in fact, and very difficult to argue. I don't support it, by the way, but I find it very efficient. It's because of its simplicity and logic, and very difficult to refute. Essentially, what he is saying is that, look, if you take two countries, one is big and powerful, like Russia, for example, is another one small and weak, like Ukraine is. So there should not ever be a war between these two countries because one who is weaker and smaller, they have to be always at peace with the larger and stronger and ask every day in the morning, hello, what would you like me to do for you? How do you feel today? Be nice, polite, and do whatever the larger country would tell them to do. Now, in case of Russia and Ukraine, actually, Ukraine asked Russia to demonstrate that they indeed have a power to show their strength and tell all the world, including Ukraine, that we mind not to go so close to our territory and we have a means to avoid that and punish those who want to do exactly that. Ukraine had two ways to deal with that. One was to say, so I'm sorry, we didn't really mean anything. No, we are okay. Okay, we are not going to join NATO. We are going to oblige to every whim you have. What would you like us to do, and so on. That's possible. Ukraine chose the other way of dealing with that. They said to Russia, you are big and powerful. Demonstrate it. Just prove it. Because if you are not, you will become second-rated power. And in fact, Ukraine will take you over and tear you apart. Okay? And that's exactly what's happening now. Look at that. Remember this from the moment that Germany attacked Russia until Germany was completely defeated, it was 4 years war. Well, Ukraine and
Sasha,
Russia
by that
almost,
same logic,
and
yeah, by
Russia
that
cannot
same,
do anything about it. Mark, did
but
you want to say something?
yeah, I was going to say, Sasha, by
Please
that same logic, and even to answer Lee Newton Rhodes' question and everything, there is this notion of that we're following Adams' logic about where democracy is, that only the elite should vote, and that has been part of the conversation that has been in some of those authoritarian governments as well. So, is that your
I
view? And
did
also,
not
Adam?
say. I didn't say
No,
only elites.
no, that was the question he asked. He was asking that should only the elite vote. It was more of a question than a statement and everything. So, because if by the notion of what your rules would be, then you might eliminate some that are not in the elite class. So that is a more of a question than a statement. So,
Mark,
clarify.
I'm
tell
sorry,
me
Mark. What I would say is number one, if you're a member of the KKK or otherwise a racist, you shouldn't be voting. If you are a sexist, you're homophobic, you shouldn't be voting. If you're the high school jock who's smoking weed and trying to have sex with the cheerleader who doesn't know anything about anything, you shouldn't vote. Otherwise, if you're a moron, you shouldn't vote. Why? Because that leads to the election of bad leaders. Okay. So there should be, just like when you want to drive a car, you have to get a license. You should get a license to vote by showing, number one, that you have sufficient knowledge of the government and a basic knowledge of policy. And number two, that you are of sufficient moral character. Now, how do we do this? That's going to be a tough task. And we have to sit down and really get into the nitty gritty because the devil is in the details. But certainly, democracy is going to be more effective when you have intelligent, reasonable, and good people voting and not allowing morons, racists, and sexists to vote. We already prohibit felons from voting. So why shouldn't we go a step further so that we can have more intelligent people making better decisions? But I will say this, I do not believe democracy is the best form of government. A benevolent dictator is the best, and Singapore is the best proof of that.
Hey, I got a question. This is actually for Kim and everything, because I mentioned the democracies, and one of the people that is up for election, and she has actually got a very difficult task ahead of her. Should she win her election and everything, I'm actually might be biased, and I'll tell you why I'm biased, because she is a fellow Cancer, for those that believe in astrology and all along those lines. But Claudio Sheinbaum, it was actually going to be running as a politician in Mexico. And we know Mexico is a very difficult area and all along those lines, but she is also, and this may be where you find it interesting, she is also a scientist and an academic. So I just wondered your thoughts about women leadership and whether we need more women leadership, because apparently this lady's saying she wants to come in and clean up Mexico, and we know Mexico is a very troubled nation and everything. So I don't know if they've ever had a female president before, but apparently Claudia Sheinbaum wants to be the first female, or wants to be a female president of that particular nation. I know you've been an advocate before of having women have a greater control and everything. And by the way, if she's elected, she would be the first female president elected by that country. And she was one of the two contenders, and she's 61 years old. So she's actually relatively young, because she's a little bit younger than myself and everything. But what's your take on women leadership in this race to get democracy around the world?
I personally, Mark, I don't think a woman or a man or anyone of gender choice is a better choice than the other. I think we need to get people with the right skill sets, the right passion, the right energy, and the right drive. I would like to see people a little bit younger in our White House. I'm tired of the White House being a retirement home. But I personally have never felt that a woman would be better than a man, except for in all this war stuff. You know, I think women think differently. I think men have very unrealistic rules in war when it comes to, oh, you can't do that. That doesn't follow the humane laws. Well, you know, war doesn't follow humane laws, you know. War isn't humane. So I don't know why all of a sudden everybody gets their hair all raised up over, oh, they did this or this to those people. Well, you know, sorry, war's war. And, you know, you men need to grow up and understand, just like in fighting, there are no real rules in fighting, you know. I believe that people need to grow up. I think that they need to learn how to negotiate a little bit better. I believe that the Palestinians tried to negotiate for many years and were rejected. I believe that a two-state situation would have made a difference. But I also think that we need to kind of take a deep breath and just say, who's really in charge and what are they doing for the greater good of their society, and what are their intentions? Yes, Mark?
Yeah, I was going to say about that same notion, and apparently I was hoping Nick would still be here, but maybe he'll come back and everything. That is and maybe Adam, you've got some thoughts, but apparently whoever wins, because apparently the other major candidate in Mexico is also a woman candidate as well. That is Xochitl Galvez, and all along those lines. So apparently either way, they will get a woman leader. But I was just wondering, are there some issues that are too difficult or that are too hard for one gender to handle versus another and everything? I don't necessarily believe that myself, but there are people that may have that kind of thought. And Mexico, like I said before, is in a very difficult position. There's a lot of cartels that are in Mexico. There's a lot of very pressing issues, including issues like we have with homelessness and job growth and a number of other things. So I was just wondering if you, Adam, if you know anything about these two candidates, and if you would be interested in seeing your opinion as to how they would manage going up against some very difficult foes in the sense of the cartels and everything else.
Well, that's a great question. I don't look at people by their gender, their race, their sexual orientation, their ethnicity. I look at them as individuals. So I look at their policies. I look at their intelligence. I look at their judgment. I look at their intangibles. Are they people who know how to overcome adversity, persevere through difficulty, and make decisions based on incomplete information? If that's a woman, then I'm all for it. If it's someone who's Black, I'm all for it. If it's someone who's gay or transgender, I'm all for it. But my judgment is not based on the superficial characteristic of someone's race or gender. It's based on who they are as a person.
But Adam, by that same logic, because recently I was looking at my Instagram and Facebook feeds, and there, for the first time, you know, here in North Carolina, we have something called the Council of State. And the first African-American woman was elected to a position within the Council of State. I want to say that Jessica is labor or something like that. But there was a lot of people that were very glad that she got that job. Ironically, and I do say ironically, there was a possibility way back when, like about 15 or 20 years ago, that my own personal mom could have had that job because she ran for Secretary of State, which is also Council of State, but the current Council of State won that office and has been in that office for a number of years. But yeah, Jessica Holmes, who is actually ironically the state auditor, so there'll be like people that even Nick might run to as well. But I do know a lot of people gave her a lot of praise because she is the first person and she got it through appointment, so she'll have to win the election if she is to retain it, but she is that first African American to get it in that space. So if I'm hearing you correctly, and I'm trying to get her to come on the network and everything, that you do not necessarily, you're not encouraged as many people are when they see somebody that is of their same ethnicity, their same gender, their same orientation, and are using that as a means to be proud of that achievement and to want to maybe even achieve it themselves and everything.
No, because I'm not a racist. I am not a racist. I don't judge people based on their race, their sex, sexual orientation, anything like that. So here's the thing. If you want to make those distinctions, you can do that. I will not do that. I judge people equally and based upon their individual characteristics. But if you want to talk about women in leadership, one thing we don't talk about are what are the weaknesses? If you want to stereotype, what are the weaknesses that women bring to leadership? Okay. Well, I'll tell you based on empirical data. Number one, they can be the most nasty human beings on the face of the earth, especially to other women. Go into any corporation, women leaders are horrible to other women. And number two, they can be far too emotional. And the women that actually succeed display more masculine characteristics and are more similar to men in leadership. And a perfect example of that is Hillary Clinton. So if you want to get into this game of judging people based upon their gender, I will tell you that the most successful women are the ones who exemplify the most masculine characteristics. And that is an empirical fact.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that because I know some women that were very successful
That's
that
where you
also
use the
were
word
very feminine and all
Men
along those
are
lines. So my
horrible
question,
rumors.
yeah, but
They're
I
worse
definitely
than
see the
women.
women that,
Gossip, gossip, gossip.
Well, you know, it's hard in these days in the 21st century, especially in academia and in politics. It's very difficult to speak the truth because it creates such a backlash.
Well,
But
what
I'm one of those
happened
people who's going to
your
speak
friend-
the truth. And the truth is exactly what I just said. The best
Hey,
women
Adam,
are the ones who exemplify masculine characteristics. Empirical
Adam,
fact.
it's worse than that. It's not what you speak, it's what you didn't say or you didn't do enough. Look what happened to the president of University of Pennsylvania and the president of Harvard and the president
Thank
of
you.
MIT. It was what they didn't say. You didn't say it strong enough, and hence she resigned UPA. Now wait a minute. When is it that she has to even say anything at all? You know, about international politics. I mean, there's no requirement legally, ethically, or morally for her to stand up and say anything at all. She's supposed to be in academia, not in politics. So when did the
but
university-
hold on a second, Nick, I don't know if you heard me earlier, but I just said that one of the Mexican women that is running for president actually came from academia. There are a number of other people that came from academia. There is a number of folks that even are engaged in politics and have been historically engaged in politics that came from academia. Some of the greatest leaders of the civil rights came from
Yeah, but it's a
academia,
different world.
including like Angela Davis and others. So I would not argue that you cannot be an academic and also be politically
Well, Mark,
motivated.
But
I
it's
will
a
say
different
this.
world. It's a different world. What happens is these three individuals were not working in politics. They were leading academic institutions. The wonderful Congress got them up in front of Congress to have them make political statements. It was wrong by Congress. And this is the fault of Congress, to take these three individuals of academia and grind them through the political position. And it was
Nick, let me take you back in time because there's a building that we go to regularly. Hold on a second, Nick. There's a building that we go to regularly. Hold on a second, Nick. There's a building that we go to regularly that is the Duke University campus. Allen Building was actually protested at, and there were African Americans that took over the Allen Building because it's actually there near Washington and Duke and all along those lines. The president at that time of that university made statements against that protest. So there have been academic folks that have been involved in protests and against protests for a number of years. We can even go back to the Vietnam War. We can go back to a number of other things. So to think that academia and politics do not mix is a fallacy, because that's been going on for decades. I'd argue ever since the country was created. I mean, some of the universities are very much political. I mean, let's look at the University of Virginia. Wasn't that founded, or at least partially founded, by Thomas Jefferson? Wasn't Thomas Jefferson one of the founders of this whole country?
But
let me just.
Okay, I'm just talking about this one incident, Mark. Okay, it is wrong for Congress to bring in front of the presidents and demand statements from them relating to political positions. What they should have said is that I am an academic. I am not a politician. Okay, I will not give a political statement. Have a good day, Congress. Okay.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say is that what Nick is talking about is these three presidents, MIT, Harvard, and Penn, were asked, is it a violation of your conduct code to advocate for the genocide of Jews? And these three morons could not answer that in the affirmative. Okay? And one of the problems is, and that's why one of them, the president of UPenn, resigned. And one of the problems is not just with them, it's also with Congress, which is also filled with a lot of idiots. But the problem with academia goes far beyond that. Academia is not teaching young people how to survive in the real world.
Hold on a second.
Not teaching financial literacy, not teaching the real world skills. They are ideologically in one direction. They're corrupting our young people.
That same logic that you just said, let's get it very clear. Claudine Gay, who is one of them, actually is connected to Duke University.
And she should be fired.
But her field is political science. So you're going to tell me that somebody that is in political science... It
doesn't matter. Anybody with an ounce of common sense would condemn any statement of genocide of Jews. It's disgusting. The fact they couldn't do it means they should be fired. And academics need to grow up and start realizing that your job is to teach students real world skills, not to advance your left-wing ideology and live in the bubble that you call academia. Because what you need to teach students is how to save money, how to be financially literate, and how to actually be marketable to employers. We're not doing that. And that's why our institutions are corrosive to our democracy and to our intellectual climate.
I would like to add to Adam's comment that we do need to be teaching our students better, our children, our future, and not only the mathematics and the basic financial, sustainable skill sets, but we also need to teach them not to trust lawyers anymore, stand up for their rights, go in and reset the button at the White House and get some of their rights back, because right now we have no rights. Actually, I don't think we live in a democracy, because we've got all of these people making up rules as we go and firing people or demanding people to step down for saying things that maybe they didn't really mean the wrong way. Okay. Way too much is going on that shouldn't be happening. Nobody
but Kim,
should be fired over a freedom of speech situation.
Kim, even freedom of speech, I want to bring it out, because actually it was a hypothetical question that was asked to represent Miss Gay and everything. And her actual closing remark, I would like to read the quote and everything, was she says that it can be she said that if when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, and intimidation, that it is actionable conduct, and we do take action. So she said that if there is action that is actually physically offensive and it is actually taking place, that they do take action and that they do eliminate those folks from that job and or those protests and everything. So she actually did answer the way that a lot of folks wanted her to answer, but people haven't paid attention to that part of the quote. And that was actually after the hypothetical question.
Well, I just think that way too much is taken out of context, and people are not focusing on the real problems and the real situations, and we are going to implode. We our country is falling apart while other countries are pulling it together. And I agree with Adam. You know what? We don't need a democracy anymore. But actually, other countries run beautiful without it. With some of the countries I love to go visit, run without it. There's no good that comes out of democracy because there's too much fighting.
But Kim, that's what I said at the beginning. I just said at the beginning, 2024, they are saying that a record-breaking 40 plus countries, which represent more than 40% of the world's population, including India and some others, are actually going to be having democratic elections. I just mentioned Mexico and everything else. So by our logic, I guess we're saying that all of those countries need to get rid of democracy and go to some other form of government and everything. Because even Ukraine is getting ready to have democratic elections. Now, whether those are puppet elections or whether those are real elections, that is up for debate.
I think they're just kissing up to the UN and to the US, and showing, oh, we can be just like you. Don't be just like us, be you. Some of the most beautiful places, people who have beautiful, happy lives, they found joy, are in these remote little areas that don't have all this nonsense going on. One leader. Yeah, they all go to that one leader. They all eat well. They all, have great communications between each other. Most of them ran by women, but and I'm not promoting women. I believe that somewhere there are the right people, but right now we're sitting in a cesspool of poison. We are drowning and nothing is going forward. We're going backwards, and we're going backwards fast. And if Russia wanted to take over us right now, they could. China really could, mainly because China pretty much owns all of our telephone lines right now. But I would just say that
Kim, you have said several times, both on the network and everything else, that one of your favorite countries is Colombia. That is considered a middle-aged democracy. It's actually the oldest democracy in Latin America. So they actually fall into the notion of democracy. And that's one of the countries that you have said yourself that you love dearly, but that falls within the context of being a democracy.
But they rule it a little bit different than what the United States do. And I don't know all of their politics. I just know that they care about the people. The people have affordable health care. The people have affordable cost of living. Everyone kind of chips in and keeps the country clean, and they focus on keeping it clean. There's a lot of poverty there, but there's a lot of poverty here too. In fact, our gap between poverty and sustainability has truly grown.
She's 100% right. I mean, if you go to Singapore, there's flowers on the streets. There's free housing, free education, free healthcare, and a wonderful dictator. And I will tell you, my mother and I are going to be going to Moscow in the summer. And I spoke to her last night, and I said, when we go to Moscow, one thing you can't do is you can't criticize the regime or say anything pro-democratic. You have to make sure you stay in line. Well, guess what? That's the cost of having a dictatorship, but it's a cost worth having because the benefits outweigh the risk. Look at Singapore and then compare
I'm going to look at Singapore.
Poverty in Singapore to the poverty here. The crime in Singapore.
Adam, hold on a second. Adam, you keep saying that Singapore is you keep saying it's a dictatorship. When I look it up, it actually says that they are a unitarian parliamentary government, which means that they are run by a parliament, not a dictatorship and everything. So your view of them is not maxing what their actual government is.
Yeah, the Russian Constitution also has a Bill of Rights, of course, but that Bill of Rights is never enforced. That's not my point, though. My point is poverty in Singapore is minimal. Crime is minimal. Drug use is non-existent. Everybody gets free housing and free education. In the United States, you have fentanyl, people, a high crime rate, inequality. And I believe in dictatorship. I'm sorry?
Adam, question.
Sasha?
Russian people have the same rights like in Singapore? Do they have also free housing and free education and everything free? Are they very happy people in Russia?
No, they do not have free housing and free education. But yes, I believe
except right to go and die in Ukraine. What other rights Russian people have, according to you?
I don't know. I don't understand your question.
What rights Russian people have, if any, according to you? Did you study what rights they have? Ordinary Russian citizens, they have no rights whatsoever. The Negroes in United States 100 years ago had 55 times more rights than today people in Russia.
I think in Russia they have rights and they have freedom.
What rights?
Not
right.
Hold
what
on.
freedom?
Hold
what
on.
are you talking about?
They don't
You
have
tell
the same. They don't have the same degree of freedom or the same.
They don't have
degree
any
of rights
freedom. They don't have any
that
rights.
Americans do, and I say that's a good thing because I don't believe. I think in America we have too much liberty and too much freedom, and I think we should have less rights and less
America,
freedom.
okay?
And I think in
I'm talking
Singapore,
about, I hate to see such educated men as you becoming Russian useful idiot, and I really hate it. It pains inside of me to see a man like you would become a Russian useful idiot. It's just incredible. It's horrible.
Sasha, I'm not a Russian useful idiot. I know all of the problems with Russia.
Okay?
No, I'm not.
You
I know
either-
all the problems.
Okay, Adam, you either
I'm
trolling me on this show. Okay, I will accept it. If you're trolling me, that's fine. I don't care. But if you
I'm not
really
doing that. I'm not doing that.
believe
You're
what
not listening.
saying, you are a useful idiot, big time, actually.
I
No,
think
I'm not
Adam
even
is just.
what I'm doing is I'm using the Russia example.
Oh,
Listen to me.
my
Hold on.
God.
If you don't listen,
You're
listen.
Adam, no
I am
one.
not.
You-
I am not an apologist for Russia. I am not a fan of Russia. What I'm saying is that I'm trying to use Russia to highlight the problems in the United States, whether it's poverty, a lack of education, a high crime rate, a corrupt democracy, corrupt leaders, the influence of money in politics. The point I'm trying to make is not to advocate for Russia. It's to say that the United States is no better, and that a
Adam,
benevolent dictator
Wait
is
until,
preferable.
God forbid, Trump will be elected. Then you will see what's really how all United States will unravel and
He
become
was
a rubble.
already elected and served 4 years, and it was no better than Vladimir Putin. And that's my point. Not to defend Russia, but to say the U.S. has no moral supremacy over any other country. And I would like you to make an argument against that, if you can.
Who said that the United States had moral supremacy?
Well, don't call me a Russian useful idiot, because if you see the
because
reason
if
I'm
you're-
making these
if you're
arguments,
announcing that Russian people are happy, that Putin is a great benevolent ruler of the country.
I never
then-
said that.
Then what are you
I
saying
said
then?
Singapore had the best
See-
benevolent dictator.
Okay, Singapore, I
No,
agree
hold
with
on,
you.
hold
I
on a
was
second,
in
hold on a
Singapore.
Thank
And I
you.
know
Hold
what
on a
Greece.
second.
Great.
Hold on a second, because I want to bring up, because you've said that a couple times. I've heard you say this a few times. So I want us to check out a little bit about Singapore. So let's check out this video.
Over 2 in 5 drug abusers were found to have first started their habit before they turned 18. And that's according to a survey conducted by the Institute of Mental Health, the first of its kind. Now, it involves more than 6,000 respondents. Let's take a look at some other findings. Well, more than half of the respondents cited cannabis as the first illicit drug consumed. And this is followed by what is commonly known as ecstasy. There was also a small number of people who took methamphetamines and heroin. The most frequently taken drug is cannabis. This is followed by ecstasy and methamphetamine, which we told you about earlier. That was taken by close to 20% of respondents. Around 1 in 10 cited heroin as their drug of choice.
We are very concerned that drug abuse starts at such a young age and at home, where young people should have parental supervision and be safe. Given the long-term impact of drug abuse, we need to do more to address this. We have increased efforts to educate the public, especially youth, on the harms of drugs and counter misinformation and proliferation of liberal drug views on foreign media and social media.
Now, we spoke to a former drug abuser. Let's hear what he says.
A snip here and a cut there. 34-year-old Jabez Toh is hard at work editing promotional videos, but his life today is very different from his youth.
I remember when at the age of 15, I met with a bunch of friends, which is part of a secret society. One day, I was introduced by a friend to taste some drugs. So out of curiosity, I took the drugs and tasted it.
And soon Jabez was craving his next hit and was willing to do anything to get it.
At the age of 16, I get caught of drug trafficking, which I don't even know the consequences at all. So to earn money, to satisfy my craving of drugs, because I need the money to buy drugs also. So I go and sell and earn some profit.
After multiple stints in and out of prison, Jabez was eventually able to get clean from drugs with the help of the halfway house where he's currently working. To help more youths whose stories are similar to Jabez's, efforts will be reinforced. At an annual Central Narcotics Bureau work plan seminar, preventive education, especially for young people, came under the spotlight.
The youth must be taught to recognize misinformation when they see it. Getting into even a soft drug, so-called soft drug, which is, say, cannabis is thought to be, can also be very harmful because it does permanent physical and mental damage to your health. And also it can act as a gateway drug, which will then allow people to graduate on to other more potent substances.
And as such, the event also included information on anti-drug advocacy and an exhibition on cannabis and its harmful effects.
Well, like Mr. To, of those who had taken drugs, around a fifth of them cited curiosity as a top reason. Others believed taking drugs might help them with problems they faced. Just over 10% took drugs under the influence of friends. But most surveys still found illicit drugs to be very harmful when consumed, especially compared with smoking or alcohol use. That's regardless of how often a drug is taken or the type of drug consumed.
Directly from your Singapore, and some of the same issues that we have here in the United States as well. So, like I said, I think it's a worldwide problem.
The amount of drug use in Singapore is minuscule. The amount of poverty
Not
is
according to
minuscule.
the statistics that I saw.
That is not true. The amount of inequality is minuscule. People get free housing, free education. There's a robust middle class. Singapore's benevolent dictators have done well by that country, and you can look it up. Now, in the U.S., we have inequality, poverty. We have educational inequality. We have wealth inequality. We have massive drug use, crime, mass incarceration. And you're telling me that the U.S. is better than or even Russia. And that's why I bring up Russia. Because guess what? You're telling me the people in the U.S. are happier. The people in the U.S. are afflicted with more problems, whether it's poverty, healthcare, education, or inequality, than almost any country on the face of the earth. And a benevolent dictatorship in Singapore has achieved the opposite results. Tell me why I'm wrong, Sasha.
Because Russia has lost over 320.
I didn't say Russia. I said, why am I wrong about a benevolent dictator?
I want to point out something very specific that a lot of people don't know in history. Okay.
Well,
and everyone hates Hitler, but Hitler banned cigarettes in his country because he learned that they kill people. They cause cancer. So he banned it. No more smoking. In the time frame that he ruled, and for years thereafter, they pretty much eliminated lung cancer from that country. Now, the minute he was done away with, everybody goes, oh, screw you. And they all started smoking 50 packs a day and whatever, killing their lungs. And now they're back to being worse than we are. But he proved a point. I didn't like the way he did other things, but he proved a point that you can eliminate these diseases if you demand that these things don't be used. You know, CVS took a stand against cancer and said, you know, we're not going to sell cigarettes in our stores anymore. They thought for sure that they were going to take a big hit, but they haven't because they sell way too many pharmaceutical things. So I just want to point out that some dictatorship, sometimes maybe what they're doing is for the greater good of people, not just you individually, but everyone. And I don't condone
But
Hitler.
hold on a second, Kim. By that same notion, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I can bring another video up about that as well. And Sasha would know better than me and everything because he knows that area and he knows that country. But while he might have been doing a cigarette ban, it is my understanding from understanding history and everything that Hitler himself was addicted to both heroin and cocaine. So there, if he had those addictions, then you might just give up one addiction for another addiction. That's one of the arguments that people even give around here, around AA and NA and all along those lines. So I
So I
find
do
it
want to
slightly
add about
ironic
those,
that he didn't have his own
Mark.
addictions and everything. But Sasha, am I correct
Mark,
in
I
thinking that
want
he
to
had his own?
add about those addictions. You know, back in the day, those were the prescriptions that people were given, and probably in other countries. So maybe he did, but maybe he didn't, because, you know, they gave heroin to a lot of women over the years for various pains and things, and they all became addicted and died from it. After a while, we learned that it's just not a good prescription drug. But, you know, pharmacists, druggists, people prescribed many things over the years that we would determine to be bad medications or bad drugs. Back then, they were just the drug that they could use for certain things. So I don't know that he had a, you know, hey, I'm getting high and, you know, addiction. I
But
think
to your
he
point, and I
just
think Adam can
was
agree with me on
using
this and
drugs that
everything.
he was prescribed.
But to your point, and I think Adam can even agree with me on this one and everything, is there has been a number of societies, including the African American Society, that were literally test subjects for a number of drugs. And all along those lines, many of us are very aware of the Tuskegee experiment, where they literally were testing and using test subjects in order to test out drugs. And Adam, I don't know if you know or agree with this, but there are some people that would even argue that there were some of the tests around both AIDS and COVID that might have been targeting minority populations as well, and all in that space. But I've definitely heard that there have been some people that have made the parallel between the Tuskegee experiment and what we have done with both AIDS drugs and COVID as well.
Well,
Adam?
Regarding AIDS drugs, you want to know what the problem was in the AIDS epidemic in the 80s? The problem was Anthony Fauci, who delayed the development of important drugs that helped to prolong the lives of people infected with HIV. And number two, Fauci spread the false notion that HIV actually was airborne. Okay? And so if you want to talk about parallels, look about what happened with COVID. Fauci became a political figure who was wrong at every turn, whether it was on masks, whether it was on inflating COVID deaths. The man was a disaster. And I don't think we need to go there because I think the evidence is fairly clear. But what I'd like to hear from Sasha. I would like to learn from Sasha why I'm wrong about my support of a benevolent dictatorship.
I don't think that you are wrong. Actually, I agree with you that the benevolent dictatorship is probably the best form of governing. There is only one problem. Certain things are very artistic in its nature and very difficult to teach, to replicate, and to make it into institution. This is the problem with this. For example, the ruler of the Singapore, he is a one-of-a-kind person who indeed made tremendous success of Singapore and its society, and it worked tremendously well. Now, even second example is already very difficult to come up with. Possible, I'm not saying that impossible, possible, but very difficult. So you cannot make it, for example, okay, I'll tell you one thing. It's more to do with business and investments. For example, I have tomorrow investment show. I've made now, I said yesterday it was 285% a year. It's already over 300%. It's a thing that I cannot replicate. I cannot teach anybody how to do it. Okay, I'll explain one thing, but there are some other 9 things that I cannot teach. It's an art form. In that respect, I'm an artist, okay? And unfortunately cannot teach anybody to do it. Even people who are with me on a show for more than 3 years, and they're listening every week, and I'm telling them exactly what I'm doing, they can't do it. Okay, but that's okay. Same thing. What has happened in Singapore, you cannot replicate it. You cannot do it in the United States or Russia or France or just anywhere. This is the problem with what you are saying, but I totally agree with you. If it could be replicated, if it could be investigated, learned from it one way or another, so on, but it's just, in my opinion, it's impossible.
Just along those same lines, and I see that Steve's joined and everything. Steve,
good
and
point.
you know, Steve
Yeah,
is
that was
running
some issues
for
with my
political
screen. I
office and
apologize.
everything.
I'll take my camera
Steve,
off.
no,
I don't know
no
why my
problem.
screen is messed up. But yeah, it's great to be here today. And I'm sorry I was late. Great to see Adam Lamparello. And I'll just touch on a couple things. I mean, this morning on World Power Edition, we talked about the Israel war. You know, we talked about you know, what's going on in the Red Sea with our Secretary of Defense asking for a maritime presence to deal with the drone attacks on that part of the world. And I guess in terms of immigration, you know, I think we have to really look at legal immigration, and I think that's the problem that we have is immigration is there's two kinds, legal and illegal. And I do agree, even as a Democrat, I'll say that there are too many people coming across the border illegally, and the Biden administration hasn't really successfully dealt with that. And I think there's a lot of people really upset about it.
Hey, Steve, just really quickly, because most of the discussion, and it was based on an article that I brought up at the beginning of the show, has been this notion of the state of democracy and whether democracy is something we need to have more of in the world or less of. And you are thinking about running for various political offices. So I just wanted your state or your thoughts about democracy. And Adam has been very much a proponent of benevolent dictators, which is where that whole conversation was coming around.
Well, let me follow. And guys, I apologize. I don't know what's going on with the screen. I don't know whether it's my lens. I'll have to reboot, but I'm just going to be virtual today without the camera. But what I will say is that I'll just turn it on. You can still see my face a little bit.
Yeah.
What I will say is that the democracy is a good thing if you can make it work. And in order to have a good democracy, you have to have a strong government that can prevent chaos, but one that respects civil rights. And it's really a narrow corridor, and it's hard to get right. And the United States has gotten it right. I mean, you know, I can go out and burn a flag in front of a man or woman who's defended life, defending the country, because that is my right. And as an American, I'm not going to go to prison. I'm not going to be shot. Someone can't just pull me in the street and arrest me for no reason. But I will agree with Adam Lamparello. I think where he might be coming from this is that there's too many times where countries say they have an election, they have a democracy, and then the tanks are in and they're controlling everything. And they're elites that aren't really delivering to the people. So a dictator can come in and say, look, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to put in order. I'm going to do all these things. And that's really the answer to your question is I believe in democracy, but it's advanced citizenship. It's hard work. And you don't just go in there and have an election. And look at all these countries that have fallen apart. Venezuela, Hungary. Hungary was supposed to be a democracy, right? Russia, Putin keeps saying he's having elections, just anointing himself every 4 years or 5 years or 10 years. So
Good.
This is the problem.
I want to mention something about the immigrants that Steve is talking about. And I sure would like to know where they count the people coming over and how they realize, you know, that we've got 1 million that crossed over. I'd like to know where are they counting all of these people and why are we not stopping them there?
But Kim, it comes down to something that Steve just mentioned. There are two different sets of rules that exist, and actually it's more than two sets, but as I think even Steve will allude to, there are immigrants that have a certain way of getting over because they have a certain skill set, so they come over from India and they are treated differently. I forget the letters that are part of that kind of immigration, and then there are the immigrants that are coming from, say, Mexico, Haiti and a number of other places. So there are different ways that we treat the immigrants based on the reason that they're coming over. Because it's H-2-1, I believe is the letter, Steve, if I'm remembering correctly, something like that. But I know
H-1B.
What is
H-1B visa, right?
H1,
So this
right.
idea that skilled immigrants are coming in to be able to work in technology or pharmaceutical or international universities. Many are actually going to Canada now, because if you came in legally from India, they only grant 88,000 in the United States of America. So there's over 400,000 waiting. But some are leaving for Canada now, because Canada just passed a law a couple of months ago where it filled up 10,000. They said you could just come on over and get your work permit. So that's a problem in America. Many people in this area where Kimberly and I live and you live, probably over 20,000. And I was on National Public Radio just last week talking about this issue. It's a big issue. And the fact of the matter is we're just, they're leaving. But at the same time, you've got the illegal immigration. People coming in illegally, not complying. Like Sasha Starr is an immigrant. He had to go through the laws leaving to go to Canada. My parents came from India. You have to go through the process. You can't just come in and walk across the border. That's what's happening.
But
And I believe,
but hold a second, Steve. Even the legal immigrants, as I think Nick and Kim had brought up, have a very unique situation, because there are some that are coming over, as you just stated, for the technology jobs and things along those lines. But there are a number of them that are also coming over for the academic education. I can tell you that even in the apartment complex that I live in, I have met at least several that have come over here, including some from mainland China and a number of other places that are seen as adversaries to us and everything. And sometimes they are supposed to go back after they are done with their education, but that doesn't always happen. Some of them wind up staying. And I think that Adam, who is in the academia field, can probably even testify to the fact that some of them do what they're supposed to do and go back to their country after getting the education, but some of them find loopholes, and there are a number of loopholes that exist, and they wind up staying in the country past that time frame that they are given. Am I not correct in that, thinking that, Adam?
You're correct. Yes.
So that's the other issue, is that some of the people that are even coming in that way, and even to Kim's point about how are we counting this, I imagine those are probably well documented. I don't know that the illegal immigrants are going to be as well documented. The other thing in my mind that happens with the illegal immigrants is a lot of them, well, one, there are the kids. That was the whole notion of the dreamers and everything, and what we should do with them since they are technically born or spent most of their education here in this area. And the other thing is that a lot of them are in border countries, which means that they are going back and forth and all along those lines. And that is another hard thing to count, because I can tell you, as one that does events, we oftentimes count people when they're going back and forth just to an event. And I imagine the same thing is happening in this kind of counting as well. So literally, if I come over to the border, let's say I'm in Mexico and I come over to Texas one time, and then I go back and I come back, am I counted 3 times? Because I've literally gone back and forth 3 times.
Look, the solution is simple. Secure the border, secure the damn border, and give amnesty to people here who are here illegally and who haven't been convicted of a felony. And as far as this discussion we had about Russia, all I want to tell the audience is this. Listen to the Russian national anthem and listen to the people of Russia. They are nationalists who have such pride in their country. They're upright citizens who are intelligent, mature, and cultured. And so are the Ukrainians. Our citizens are morons. And when I listen to the Russian national anthem, when I see people standing up with pride, when I see the intelligence of the average citizen, I think, you know what? Why isn't that the case here?
But Adam, to your point, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sasha, I think that I've heard Sasha say several times that the Russian form of culture is nowhere near that of Ukrainians and other forms of entertainment as well, because in his mind, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, that is not a true representation of Russian culture in modern times. It's almost like a bastardization, if I can use that word, and everything. Is that a correct assessment of the way that you feel about it and all along those lines? Because I've heard you say
they're both very smart.
Sasha, am I correct?
Partially, yes. Maybe 5% of what you just said is correct. 95% is not. But let me just explain to you that the Russian nation is a conglomerate of a mix of Scandinavian culture Byzantine culture, and after they were overrun by Mongols, which were ruling Russia for 250 years. There was not even a country as Russia. For 250 years, it was so-called Ulus Juche. Ulus, it's a territory, and Juche is the name of the oldest son of Genghis Khan. Okay, there was no Russia, period. So for after 250 years, it was a mixture of Asian nations such as Mongols, Tatars, Buryats, and many, many, many others. So the ethnic element of Scandinavian and Byzantine, which are European elements, they were down to maybe 20, maybe 25 maximum, 25%, 75%. It's Asian culture, it's an Asian country. So although in the European part of Russia, like Moscow, for example, where Adam is going in a few months, the people are more or less looking European, at least. In Siberia, in all the rest of the Russians, they don't even look like they don't even look like European and so on. Now, on the other hand, Ukraine was always part of European civilization. They were not overrun as Russia by Mongols. They were part of Lithuania and Poland Union, and as such, they were existing until the recent times. So the Ukrainians, ethnically, they are real Slavic people. The Russians, they are mostly Asian people, not Slavic people whatsoever. That's a major difference between Ukrainians and Russians.
Yes, but you would agree that Ukrainians and Russians are both very smart, cultured people who love their country.
Ukrainians agree. Russians, no.
I'm for Colombia or Greece personally. I think that they've got it right, and unfortunately, we're at the top of the hour. And thank you, everyone, for this marvelous conversation. I feel like I gained so much by listening to all of these intelligent people. Mark, you want to wrap us?
Yep, get ready to hit the button to wrap this show, and we'll be back with World Edition on tomorrow.
Thank you.
We'll
Have a great holiday. See you guys Thursday. Enjoy a little bit. Take some time off.
Bye-bye.